Welcome everyone to the Let's Unpack That series, a new series by the RSSGD where we interview some great queer icons in our community and beyond. First up, for our Elections and Politics episode, we're really excited to have Assemblyman Lee. Now, Assemblyman Alex Lee is a trailblazer, the youngest Asian American, first openly bisexual, and the first Gen Z legislator in California history. Running with a grassroots campaign built on fighting for intersectional identities and communities, Alex has made it his goal to fight not only for CA25, but for the entire country. An alumni of UC Davis and a fighter for all communities, Assemblyman Lee's historic win is a huge advancement for all the LGBTQ plus people in our country. Hello, Assemblyman Lee. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing just great, and it's a pleasure to be on and be on here.
Would you like to share your pronouns, any identities you want to talk about?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. My name is Alex Lee. I'm the state assembly member for California's Assembly District 25. My pronouns are he, him. I identify as a bisexual member of the community, but I also can go by queer or pan. It works too.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. I know you're busy, so we'll jump right in with the questions.
Yeah.
So as I just said, you are bisexual, you're a person of color, you're Gen Z. This government, the way it is now, is not really built to support people like you and me. What has been your experience with all these intersectional identities, not only being a part of this country and running this government, but also running and becoming a part of it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the institutions we have, there's some amazing democratic and robust institutions, but largely they were built for cis white men, right? Cis white men as long as the 1700s before. And as people who have been outside, right, with our many multiple marginalized communities, marginalized identities and communities we belong to, we know how the rules and institutions aren't working for us. So, in a way, we actually know how to fix it, right? We know what's broken and how to fix it. So that's really my intention to do so, especially for people of color, especially young people, and especially for queer people.
Yeah, so let's unpack that. So
Yeah.
you're kind of like advising, because another question I have on here is
Mm-hmm.
many, college students like me, and I'm sure as you experienced it, we are very disillusioned with politics in general. Like, we
Yeah.
see so many times these politicians who claim to be very radical and fighting for our communities, but then just fall into the pitfalls of many other politicians. So, for example, many politicians in this current election fought on the stance of restorative justice, on like fighting against things like police brutality, all these issues
Mm-hmm.
that have existed for since the country has existed, yet they
Yeah.
only cared about it now in a way that we believe, many of us believe, is to get our vote. What do you say to people not only who are disillusioned by the government, but are very critical and are very untrustworthy, as they should, of politicians?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very valid disillusionment a lot of people feel. I feel a lot of times where I'm thinking, wow, why am I doing this? This like really is hard and difficult. But it's important to remember that the system was kind of built to disillusion us because once we check out and we tune out, they have no one to keep them accountable, right? So it's really important for us to be holding politicians accountable, and it includes myself too, right? Holding me accountable and me holding other politicians accountable, as well as what I would like to call, a co-governance structure, right? Where activists, community members are just as much in the driver's seat of decision making, and not just the politicians alone. Excuse me. So we have to make sure that we're holding them accountable, right? And it's so important that the work we do on the streets, in our advocacy, doesn't just end with elections. No one will solve elections just because a new president was elected or a new state senator or something. Doesn't mean the problems are over. And that's why I'm so encouraged by especially our generation, Gen Z, and of course millennials as well, and even younger, the Gen Z, which is really awesome. Just really being out there and holding people accountable, right? Because right now you're seeing a lot of stuff about the Sunrise Movement, especially that hold the Biden administration, well, the President-elect Biden's hopeful administration accountable, and we have to keep doing that, right? We can't let them off the hook. And as that, I'm sure you've seen those memes, right? We can't just go back to brunch and presume everything is normal.
Exactly. Yeah, again, which unfortunately a lot of non-POC, non-queer communities believe that now everything's great and perfect, but
No,
luckily we know what's up. Speaking of
exactly. We got to be at the table,
exactly.
and
Speaking
not
of
not not the brunch table. I mean, the decision-making table.
I do miss brunch though very much. One major thing I've lost.
Yeah.
Speaking of holding politicians accountable, including yourself, one really interesting thing you campaigned on was restorative justice reform. Can you speak
Yeah.
on that and what exactly you have planned in that sense?
Yeah. I mean, our country obviously is built in, even to generously speak, it's a system based on punishment, right? You lock people away, you punish them, and that's supposedly to make us safer. My platform about public safety and when it comes to restorative justice and transforming our system is to dismantle the carceral state that exists. The system that basically says these people are bad, and usually they're black and brown people, right? And we just lock them up and forget about them. No, the opposite should be true. We should be refunding our communities into housing and education programs and making sure that people have a fair shot at life, right? Not everyone was born into the same circumstances or the same luck. And sometimes that leads them into paths that aren't so constructive, unfortunately, right? But I think having talked to people who've been through the system too, not everyone, I have not met one person who is the stereotypical 1970s like slasher or something, right? That the police and law enforcement want you to believe exists. That is complete myth as far as I'm concerned. And so we have to be really reinvesting our communities. And that's why I'm also going to be very opposed to any tough on crime bills. An example of that is we had Proposition 20 on the ballot just this ballot cycle that would have criminalized more things and thrown people more in jail. Huge opponent of that. And if there are any more measures like that, and I'm sure there will be, I'll be really staunchly opposed to those things.
And we thank you for that work. And I'm very happy that you agree with so many of these um, radical sense of like defunding, abolition, all those things. So related, but also
Yeah.
a little petty. So you went to UC Davis, right?
Yeah.
Now UCSB, which is fine, totally okay.
Well, UC Davis is the top UC if you look at a map.
Okay, but you know what? It's fine. Another time. Okay.
I'm saying if you look at the map, it is the top UC.
Oh, like physically.
I'm just saying it's the top one. It's the top one.
Okay.
Can't dispute that, right? You can't dispute it.
You know what? We'll talk after the interview. Anyway, was it like really, you talked about some of your identities. Was it your college life at UC Davis? Was your childhood? What drove you to becoming this grassroots candidate?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of things that culminated in that way. I was lucky to grow up in my home community that I ran for. So when I ran, I already had a lot of grassroots support of people that knew me in the community, and not through traditional like, oh, I ran for something or I did this fancy title or something, but just like when you grow up in a place, you tend to know people. You know your friends' family, just people you went to school with, people you go to, the places you shop. That's just organically how all of us have networks. And a lot of times the political status quo will tell you that's not enough, but that's not true. You grew up in a place or you've lived in a place and you are part of that community. You have just as much a right to represent it as anyone with the fancy title or not. So, and I think that combined with how the modern progressive movement has been evolving with, the campaigns of Bernie Sanders, with Ilhan Omar, AOC, all the great icons we have, it's really showing us what a model for being a progressive grassroots leader really is, right? From prior to that, we didn't have a lot of great templates or examples to do so, but now watching these great role models, we can adapt these role models for our own communities,
Even then, like what you said earlier about, because a lot of them are role models, but also a lot of them, are not as into certain topics as we would like. Not many of those like role models have like talked about prison abolition, defunding, which I won't ask you about, but which like a lot of like college students like myself are very passionate about. Which again, both sides of the same coin. One thing I do want to ask you though, so you talked about your community. So beginning your campaign, like how much did you rely on, and how much did you make a point of outreaching to your queer and POC communities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think every community that we belong to, it's important to talk to the people who, are part of our advocacy groups, are part of our, local communities of this, right? Assembly District 25 is one of the only plurality Asian Pacific Islander districts, so it's one of two. So obviously, being Asian was, I think, the more I guess obvious. I don't want to say obvious, but it's a more clear identity than the community that has worked with. And sometimes even being queer and Asian is not a plus with certain communities, right? How our communities intersect with each other is not always so neat or so. Sometimes like identity politics bingo that conservatives think, right? It's just like, oh, you have all these things that is so great for you, but it's hard, right? Because we have all these overlapping cultural, sexual, and every other identity that sometimes they don't always match with each other, and we have to reckon it with these communities on a whole, right? But while we were campaigning, we knocked on over 30,000 doors, right? So we would talk to people of every political, racial, racial and sexual orientation and persuasion you could think of. And so every conversation was obviously unique, but we'd always be able to relate and talk to people based on where they're at, right?
Okay, so you tried the approach of connecting to everyone. So you built upon your
Yeah,
identity. We also made sure to talk to people who weren't even part of it, which is, what we hope for.
yeah.
Unionization, or not unionization, but a good of all the different identities and communities that
Yeah.
exist in there, which is really great. What's it go? So I also saw that you were in student government at
Yep.
UC. Yeah. So do you think that impacted? Like, did that give you tips on how to reach out to like so many different kinds of people? Because as I'm sure you know, the UC campuses are not full of as many gray, open people as we wish.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, I think student government is a great foundational skill for everyone. Look, any activity you do in college, I think, is a great activity, especially if you do go to a wonderful UC. But student government really helps you, right? Because when I was student body president, ASUCD president at Davis, I represented basically 30,000 students, right? That is essentially a small town in California. And you really do learn a lot of foundational skills, right? Because a lot of the things you learn in any org you join, if there's like interpersonal problems, teamwork problems, all that stuff is the same in politics, right? You might have those petty personal politics or how to solve an issue together. It's all the same. I see the same dynamics play out in local government and state government. And sometimes I think like we have a leg up when we do these things in college or in school, whatever stage you're at earlier in life, because these are hard lessons that you can't learn from the book. You can't just learn willy nilly or through osmosis. You have to learn from trial and error, unfortunately. So sometimes I see older folks who get their first stunt at local office or something, and they haven't learned those hard lessons that I learned in student government, where I would have said, I would not have done that thing. That's like, why would you do that? You're like twice my age. Why would you do something like that? And I think because you haven't had the opportunity to grow in that way. And we have to also accept, a lot of times people grow through mistakes or they grow through trial and error. And I think that's a natural process of it. And I think student government helps you do that.
So would you give some advice that you would give maybe to someone who maybe not even want to go into politics, but into like advocacy like you have? So you're saying even if it's not student government, by like, taking on leadership roles, even starting in college, even starting earlier, as you said earlier, the younger generation,
Mm-hmm.
that can really help you develop those skills?
Yeah, definitely. Any setting or organization where you can build team building, especially towards a goal, is always going to be helpful. It's so transferable, literally in every sector, and I can't tell you how many people sadly don't seem to have those skills sometimes. Because I mean, look, when you work, especially in politics, in any realm, whether it's advocacy or elected office, you need to learn how to work with each other because we're ultimately in democracy. And if you don't have those foundational skills to persuade other
Believe
people who might think different, when it's progressive movement, right, we're working together.
So you've touched on again like issues with other people. You don't have to name drop people, or if you'd like to call them out, and would love that. Could you maybe give an example or just give tips on how to deal with these people who might go against you based on your identities, what you're working for, like all of that? Because I am a young queer person of color. I know I have faced pushback in many different realms, and I can imagine
Yeah.
how it is to be someone with other identities than I do. Can you give any tips or give any examples of how you've overcome that?
Yeah, the advice I always give on that is like there will always be detractors and haters that will hate you for whatever reason it is they'll come up with, right? Whether you're too young, you're too queer, you're too brown, you're too Asian, whatever it is, they'll find something, right, to peg it on you. Like they don't like you. Um, but for every person like that, there are an equal amount, if not more, people that will accept you and love you because of those identities too, or despite this today sometimes, right? Based on something else in your life. So you really, I think, shouldn't dwell too much on those people. Like a lot of those people just want to drag you down, especially in the work we do. If you're working in advocacy or in government, there are always going to be like these people who think they're your enemies or something. They don't want to work on common goals. It's unfortunate. But you shouldn't waste your we shouldn't waste our mental energy and our emotional labor on dwelling on them, because if they're always just going to be drinking from that haterade, screw them, right? Because we gotta make sure our efforts are in working with the people that will are our allies and who in good faith want to work together, right? Even if they might see us differently or they have some maybe not so great views, but they have good faith and they do want to work together. I think that's the more constructive energy where we should be putting towards.
Man, I really like that. So
Yeah.
you mentioned again,
And it's obviously easier said than done. I realize that, but it's something we have to always constantly remind ourselves too.
which is yeah, we have to remember
Yeah.
that some people are not worth the effort. Some people are
Yeah.
never gonna listen to you, and that's okay. Because you're right, there are
Yeah.
just as many people who are there to support you and admire you and work with you, which is great.
Yeah. You just gotta cut toxic people out of your life.
Okay, exactly. Yes. Okay. So as I'm sure you know, we just had a pretty. Besides your election, we had a pretty big presidential election a few weeks ago.
Yep.
As again, I've mentioned disillusionment. Because again, like President-elect Joe Biden has promised many things for the queer community, for people of color communities, for college students all around. And again, we are critical. We are worried that it's all a way for him to get our votes and not actually follow through. So, what are some steps that a basic college student like I can do to make sure we hold him accountable and make sure that we get what we deserve?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's the question where a lot of young people and a lot of people who are invested in this election outcome are asking themselves. It's important to join with local groups to pressure the Biden administration, to especially pressure your member of Congress as well, to make sure that we're not letting them off the hook, right? Um, I will tell you that a lot of legislators and politicians in general, right, they do care about what their constituents say, especially when they are saying negative things about them. So if you really want to hold them accountable, right? Because they've made certain promises to us. They said voting Democrat would solve our problems, and it should. It honestly should, right? So we got to hold them to it. So in any avenue you can, think about holding them accountable because, I think it's important. I think people underestimate sometimes how strong their personal platform is. It's I'm not saying posting on social media is enough, right? It's never enough to do that. But your own personal network and your own personal platform, you can really shape the opinions of people, right? Because if you go and you say something about the Biden administration just appointed so and so and they suck, and then maybe your friends would be like, wait, who's that? That's really bad, right? Having that kind of grassroots organic relationship building and sharing that information with people is a form of accountability too, because without you being able to use your platform and perhaps the knowledge, the Biden administration or other administrations or politicians might get away with doing things that people actually don't like, right? And it's important to build that. That's the first step, obviously. That's the first step, is to make people aware. And the second step is, how do you activate that in your local community? And it might look different for every community.
Yeah, I really like that. Okay, so we're about to get to some fun rapid fire questions, but
Sure.
before that, I just want to ask, what advice do you have for young queer people of color like yourself, who are even younger? With Gen Z, I think we're both Gen Z, so I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
What advice do you give to people younger than yourself, maybe going into politics, advocacy? You've already touched and given a lot of great advice, but any last things you want to say to them about pushing forward and working to help people in this country?
Yeah. I actually get this question a lot, especially like how to get involved, how to push things. One is, you don't have to be elected to make a difference. I think that's really important. It is obviously important in the sense that we don't want to always be wasting our energy yelling at elected officials to do the right thing. Why not just replace them and make them have someone who will be responsive on their own? But the second thing is, like, if you do want to run for office, especially as a young person of color, especially a queer person of color, I would always say just be authentic about who you are and find a position that fits you. Don't run for something just to run for something. Anyone will be able to tell that. Your voters will be able to tell that. Your family will be able to tell that. Like, if you're passionate about something, you should go for it, even if it seems kind of crazy and impossible at the moment. It will work out. If you want to run for Congress, if you've never held any office before, do it. Just do it if that's the one you want to do. Right? Don't climb there. I don't believe in that, because, like you said, people will know. And second thing is, on the authentic part, is like, there will always be times where someone somewhere will say, well, you should tone it down on your culture. You should tone it down on your sexuality or something. Don't, like, use your best judgment. If you feel that's appropriate, then you should do it, but don't feel like you have to be pressured into it, because ultimately what your community wants is someone who is a real person, who is authentic. And if that is your way of expressing it, you should do it that way.
Yeah, I really like that. Thank you so much. Okay, you ready
Yeah, yeah.
for some fun rapid fire?
Sure. Yeah.
Favorite musical artist?
Favorite musical artist, Odessa.
Oh, okay. Favorite queer idol?
uh, that's tough. I don't have one right now off the top of my head I can pick from.
We'll come back to it. It could be anyone.
Yeah.
One of your favorites, we get it. A favorite college memory?
Favorite college memory. I really like being my school mascot for a day. That was fun.
What is UC Davis's mascot?
It's a horse. It's Aggie.
Was it like the two-part costume with like a
Yeah.
person?
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
you the front
Well,
or
no,
the?
no, not two-part costume. It's a one. It's a one-person thing.
Okay, I was about to ask you, were you the
Yeah.
head or the butt? Okay, great. Okay. Where in quarantine, what's your comfort TV show or movie?
I've burned through so many TV shows and Netflix and stuff, but I would really like to watch The Mandalorian season 2, but I don't have Disney Plus anymore, so that's what I would want to watch. So
I like that. I like that. Okay. Do you have an answer for the queer idol question yet? Anyone that you look up to, an icon you really like?
it's hard. I feel like it's a lot of people, and I don't want to single out anyone in case they were here. So because I might meet them one day. So I'm gonna pass on this one for now.
That's valid. You know what? I like that mindset. I like that mindset. Okay.
It's just
Oh,
hard. There's actually a lot of good folks. I'm like, ooh, who's there? Yeah, I'll pass on this one.
I like your mindset. You might meet some of them,
Yeah.
so you don't want to be called out. I like
Yeah.
that. All right, last question. What are you gonna do right after this interview?
I'm actually gonna hop on a bunch of other meetings for the rest of the day. But it's really awesome being on this interview.
Of course, yeah. Do you have anything left you want to say? Any questions you have?
Um, yeah, the only last thing I want to say is if everyone's listening and you want to get involved somehow, feel free to reach out to us. I mean, I might not reach out very quickly, but we will reach out at some point. We want to be helpful to you, especially if you're a young person trying to make a difference. There's so many ways to do it, and you have more power than you ultimately think you do.
Thank you, Assemblyman Lee. We really appreciate it. That has
Yeah,
been this
appreciate
episode.
it. Oh wait, last thing. Sorry, last thing is I should say how you can reach out to me is on Instagram I'm at Vote Alex Lee, and Facebook I'm at Vote Alex Lee as well, and on Twitter I'm at Vote Alex Lee 2020. So that's how you can reach me. I should have let you know how you could do it. Okay, but that's the ways.
Okay. That has been this episode. Let's unpack that. Thank you so much, Assemblyman Lee, and thank you all for watching. Goodbye.